The sorrowing deep, a place where the shadows whisper secrets and the rain weeps for the lost. Beware, for once you enter, you may never leave. The storm raged like a living thing, howling and tearing its way through the small town of Kettlewood. Rain hammered the streets, pooling into rivers of blackened water that gurgled through the gutters. Somewhere in the cacophony, a scream split the air, a shrill, guttural cry that didn't sound human. Cassie Brent froze mid-step. The sound wasn't just a scream, it carried something primal, something wrong. She'd heard screams in her years as a 911 dispatcher, shouts of pain, terror, despair, but this was none of those. It was something deeper, darker, and it chilled her to the bone. She reached into her pocket for her phone, only to find it dead. Power must have gone out, typical during storms this fierce. Frustration mingled with unease as she grabbed her flashlight and jacket. The scream came again, and this time it was closer. Her legs moved before her brain could object, carrying her out into the storm. Cold rain lashed her face as she followed the sound, boots splashing through puddles that reflected jagged lightning. The scream seemed to pull her toward the old Hargrave house, a decaying relic at the edge of town. Every town had a place like the Hargrave house. Rotting and abandoned, it loomed over the neighborhood like a scar. Parents whispered warnings about staying away, while kids dared each other to sneak inside. Cassie had grown up with those stories, but now, standing in its shadow, the house felt alive. The scream tore through the air once more, this time unmistakably from inside the house. Her flashlight flickered as she shone it toward the upper window. For a split second, she thought she saw someone staring back at her, a pale face pressed against the glass, mouth open in a silent howl. She blinked, and it was gone. "Is someone in there?" Cassie called out, though her voice barely carried over the storm. No answer. Despite every instinct screaming at her to turn back, she pushed open the warped front door. The darkness inside swallowed her whole, and the door creaked shut behind her, sealing her fate. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rot and mildew. The walls were smeared with mold, the floorboards warped and sagging under her weight. The faint beam of her flashlight cast long shadows that seemed to shift as she moved. "Hello!" she called again, her voice trembling, still nothing. She stepped deeper into the house, the door creaking shut behind her. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. Her flashlight caught a trail of dark, red droplets leading toward the basement door. Her stomach twisted. She knew she should leave, but she couldn't. Something, whether duty or morbid curiosity, drew her forward. The basement door hung ajar, revealing a void of impenetrable darkness. Her flashlight barely dented the gloom as she descended the narrow, creaking stairs. Each step echoed louder and louder until she reached the bottom. The sight made her blood turn cold. The walls were smeared with symbols, drawn in what looked like blood. Limbs, both human and animal, were piled in the corner, grotesquely twisted and broken. And in the center of the room stood a figure, its back to her. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its pale, stretched skin glistening in the dim light. Cassie's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. "Hey!" she called, though her voice cracked. "Do you need help?" The figure didn't move. The beam of her flashlight trembled as she took a cautious step forward. It caught the edge of the figure's face. Too many eyes, too many teeth, all arranged in a grotesque mockery of humanity. And then it turned. Its scream erupted, loud enough to rattle her bones. It wasn't alone. From the shadows, others emerged, dozens of them crawling on all fours, their bodies contorted and mouths stretched impossibly wide. Cassie stumbled back, her flashlight falling to the ground. In the dim, flickering light, she saw the massive creatures closing in, their twisted forms slithering and skittering toward her. She bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind her, but the house wasn't letting her go. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the walls warping as the shadows twisted and writhed. She reached the front door and yanked it open, only to stop in her tracks. The street outside was gone. In its place stretched a vast, blackened sea. The rain had stopped, the air eerily still. The water reflected the house behind her, as well as the pale, misshapen figures standing on the surface like it was solid ground. She turned back, desperate for an escape, But the creatures were there too, pouring out of the walls, their empty eyes glinting with malice. A cold, wet hand wrapped around her ankle. Cassie screamed, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. More hands grabbed her, pulling her toward the black water. It rose to meet her, freezing and suffocating as it swallowed her whole. The darkness closed over her and the world went silent. Cassie woke to find herself standing in a vast void. The ground beneath her feet was smooth, black, and impossibly cold. A sickly green light pulsed in the distance, revealing a colossal shifting form. It was made of limbs and faces, endlessly writhing and merging. Eyes opened and closed across its surface, staring directly at her. "You heard the call," it said, its voice 1,000 whispers overlapping, "and now you belong to the deep." "No," Cassie choked, shaking her head. "I didn't." The creature laughed, a sound that made her head throb. "There is no helping," it hissed, "only joining." The faces on its body began to scream, the sound growing louder and louder until it drowned out her thoughts. The void closed in, suffocating her in darkness. Cassie gasped for air, her vision blurring as the darkness pressed in. Shadowy tendrils reached out, wrapping around her, pulling her deeper. Her eyes widened in terror, the realization sinking in. There was no escape from the endless void. Days later, the storm cleared, and Kettlewood returned to its quiet routines. No one noticed the pale figure standing in the upstairs window of the Hargrave house. Cassie Brent's face was pressed against the glass, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, shadows dancing in the corners. The townsfolk whispered of ghosts, but no one dared to investigate. The sorrow of the Hargrave house lingered, a haunting presence that refused to fade away. The village of Kettlewood, once again, settled into its familiar rhythms, yet something imperceptible had shifted. The storm had left more than just physical scars. It had etched a deep unease into the hearts of the villagers. Cut to stock footage of a serene village morning, mist rising over fields. At Hargrave House, the air was thick with a lingering sense of dread. Cassie Brent had not been seen since that fateful night. Her absence was a silent echo that haunted the halls, a ghostly reminder of the storm's wrath. Cut to stock footage of an old empty hallway, light streaming through dusty windows. Down by the sorrowing deep, the waters were calm, as if they held secrets too heavy to reveal. The once turbulent waves now whispered softly against the shore, their song a melancholic lullaby. Cut to stock footage of a tranquil lake, gentle ripples disturbing the surface. In the village square, life continued. Children played, unaware of the shadows that lurked at the edge of their world. The elders exchanged worried glances, their conversations hushed and filled with unspoken fears. Cut to stock footage of children playing in a village square, elderly villagers talking in the background. And yet, amidst the sorrow and the fear, there was a glimmer of hope. The villagers came together, supporting one another, their bonds growing stronger in the face of adversity. Cut to stock footage of villagers helping each other, repairing a roof, sharing food. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of the storm began to fade, but the lessons it taught remained. The sorrowing deep had left its mark, a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. Cut to stock footage of the sun setting over the village, casting a golden glow. And so, Kettlewood moved forward, forever changed, but united in their resolve to face whatever came next, together. Cut to stock footage of villagers walking into the distance, the sun setting behind them. The pale figure at the window was gone, but the silent scream of Cassie Brent remained, a haunting memory of the sorrowing deep, fade to black. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village of Kettlewood. Cut to stock footage of a village at dusk, shadows stretching across the ground. Hargrave House stood silent, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the twilight sky. Cut to stock footage of an old eerie house at dusk. As the protagonist approached the house, each step felt heavier, laden with the weight of unspoken fears. Cut to stock footage of a person walking towards a large, creaky door. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the silence was deafening. Cut to stock footage of an old, dimly lit hallway, shadows flickering. The protagonist moved through the house, each room more sinister than the last. Cut to stock footage of a person walking through a dark, cluttered room. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien, twisted by the unseen forces that lingered within. Cut to stock footage of a dark, cluttered room. In the attic, the air was cold and the darkness felt almost tangible. Cut to stock footage of a dimly lit attic, dust particles floating in the air. The protagonist's breath fogged in the chill, and a sense of dread settled deep in their bones. Cut to stock footage of a dimly lit attic, dust particles floating in the air. It was there, in the heart of the house, that the protagonist felt the presence of something watching, waiting. Cut to stock footage of a dark corner, shadows shifting. The air crackled with a sinister energy, as if the very walls were alive with malevolence. Cut to stock footage of a dark corner, shadows shifting. The return to Hargrave House had revealed its true nature, a place where the past and present intertwined, haunted by the echoes of those who had come before. Cut to stock footage of an old photograph on a dusty table. As the protagonist left, the house seemed to sigh, its secrets once more hidden in the darkness. Cut to stock footage of the protagonist walking away from the house, the sky darkening. The journey was far from over. The shadows of Hargrave House would continue to loom large over Kettlewood. Cut to stock footage of the protagonist walking away from the house, the sky darkening. And so, the story of the sorrowing deep continued, its mysteries still waiting to be unraveled, fade to black. The night grew colder as the protagonist ventured deeper into the heart of Kettlewood. Cut to stock footage of a dark, eerie forest at night, the wind rustling through the trees. The air was thick with anticipation, every shadow a potential threat. Cut to stock footage of a person walking through a dense forest, their silhouette barely visible. The path led them to an ancient clearing where the trees seemed to whisper secrets of old. Cut to stock footage of an ancient, eerie clearing in the forest, the moonlight casting eerie shadows. In the center of the clearing stood an old, decrepit altar, covered in moss and vines. Cut to stock footage of an ancient altar in a forest clearing, overgrown with moss. It was here that the source of the haunting could be felt most strongly, a palpable malevolence that clung to the air like a heavy fog. Cut to stock footage of a person standing before the altar, their breath visible in the cold night air. The protagonists steeled themselves, knowing that this was the moment of truth. Cut to stock footage of a person taking a deep breath, their face set with determination. They reached into their bag and pulled out an old, weathered book, its pages filled with arcane symbols and incantations. Cut to stock footage of an old book being opened, the pages filled with ancient writing. With a deep breath, they began to chant, their voice steady and resolute. Cut to stock footage of a person chanting, their voice echoing through the clearing. The air around them crackled with energy, the very ground trembling beneath their feet. Cut to stock footage of the ground shaking, leaves and debris swirling in the air. As the chant reached its climax, a dark, shadowy figure emerged from the altar, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Cut to stock footage of a dark, shadowy figure emerging from an ancient altar. The protagonist stood firm, their voice unwavering as they faced the entity head-on. Cut to stock footage of a person standing resolutely before a shadowy figure. The confrontation was intense, the air filled with the sounds of the protagonist's chanting and the entity's otherworldly wails. Cut to stock footage of a person chanting, their voice competing with eerie, otherworldly sounds. The struggle seemed to last an eternity, the very fabric of reality bending under the strain. Cut to stock footage of the forest clearing, the air shimmering with energy. But at last, with a final powerful incantation, the protagonist banished the entity, its form dissipating into the night like mist. Cut to stock footage of a shadowy figure dissolving into the air, the night growing still. The clearing fell silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a great weight had been removed. Cut to stock footage of the forest clearing, now calm and peaceful. Exhausted but triumphant, the protagonist knew that the haunting of Hargrave House had finally been laid to rest. Cut to stock footage of a person walking away from the altar, their shoulders sagging with relief. The village of Kettlewood could now begin to heal, its shadows no longer haunted by the past. Cut to stock footage of a peaceful village at dawn, the first light of day breaking over the horizon. And so the tale of the sorrowing deep came to a close, its mysteries unraveled and its ghosts put to rest, fade to black. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.